Hi. Last time we talked about Python functions, and we had a function where we passed in a couple different arguments. We could pass in a name, and we could pass in the number of times we wanted to say hello to someone. And if I pass in Sally and I want to say hello 5 times, the argument Sally is copied into the parameter name. So name now equals Sally, and 5 is copied into n times for number of times. And then if I run the function with a different list of arguments, so we'll say Robin and 3, then it'll say hello to Robin 3 times because the name is Robin and number of times is 3. And we've got a for loop in here that's going through for x, that's just a temporary variable keeping track of the number of times we're going through the loop here, in range n times. So range n times will create a list of numbers from 0 to number of times minus 1. So if I pass in the 3, it'll create a list 0, 1, 2, and then it'll stop. So it ends up being 3 numbers. And so we go through the loop 3 times. Well, this is using functions with positional parameters, meaning the order that you pass in those arguments is what is most important. We can also call the function with named parameters. We can say, well, we're going to pass in the name, and then we're going to pass in the number of times, and we're going to specify which argument that we're sending in is supposed to match up with which parameter in your function. And naming them like this gives us the flexibility that we could change the order, and we could pass in the number of times first, and we could pass in the name second, and it still works. We could also do something called providing default arguments. So we could say if someone doesn't pass any arguments in, well, we could have a default on that first argument to you, and a default from the number of times 1. Let me make sure to save this and run this. And now if I type in say hello and I don't have any arguments I'm passing into the function, nothing between the parentheses, then it says hello you once. And then if I wanted to say, well, let me pass in a name of Heather, it'll use that name and it'll default the number of times to 1. We could also call that function with number of times equal to 5, and it'll default the name to Hugh, and the number of times it'll use what we passed into the function. Excellent. Well, there's one more very complicated way of passing in arguments that I want to talk about, and that is when you're not sure how many arguments are going to be passed into the function. So you'll have possibly a variable number of arguments that you're passing in. So let's say maybe we're passing in a list of names. And so now instead of my for loop going for range and having different numbers in there, I'm going to just say that I'm passing in, possibly it's going to be like passing in a tuple of names, and I can one by one go through each of those and print out hello to each of the people in that list. So to say that we want a variable number of arguments, we'll just put a star in front of that parameter names, and so this causes all of the items being passed in to be put into a tuple. And here, just for our own benefit, I would like to print out the number of arguments passed into the function, and that's going to be set to the length of names. So let's go ahead and run this. And so if I want to say hello, and this time I just have names that I want to put in there. Let's say I just want to say hello to one person. Well, the number of arguments that I passed into that function was 1, and so I just went through that for loop 1 time and I said hello to Sam. If I want to pass in, let's say, 3 arguments, then my function realizes that names is actually going to be a tuple with 3 things in it, Sam and Kim and Tim. There are 3 arguments, and then I'll go through the for loop 3 times and say hello to each of those people.